So, an important topic today for Audit Tuesday, the principle of least privilege and how it matters to identity, security, and compliance. So, to help explain this topic, the problem, as well as the solution, we're honored to have a cybersecurity advisor from the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, Donald E. Hester. Also joining us is Karina Clever, CEO of Clever Compliance, who has over 20 years of hands-on experience in building GRC centers of excellence, and our own certified ethical hacker UATest CEO, Garrett Grajek. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Perfect. So, Donald, let's start with you. So, can you please introduce yourself, share your background, and what you're currently doing at the CISA?
Sure. So my name is Donald Hester. I'm a cybersecurity advisor for the San Francisco Bay Area. There are cybersecurity advisors all across the country. I just happen to be in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've been in San Francisco Bay Area for almost all my career. So prior to coming here, I was a cybersecurity auditor or IT auditor for 20 plus years when I worked for a regional accounting firm. Primarily, my role was IT audits, mostly related to financial systems, but it got into everything else, PCI compliance and other types of compliance. And then after working there for over 20 years, I jumped over to the government side and worked for local government. I was the head of cybersecurity for the city of Livermore for about 2.5 years before I came here to CISA. Or the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. I'll call it CISA from now on because that's a mouthful. But my role now is to help the stakeholders get connected with the services that the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency has for them. So that's pretty much my role.
So, can you please explain to the audience what CISA is and how to work with CISA?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So a lot of people, they think of a 4-letter or 3-letter agency. We're a 4-letter agency, so we're a little bit different, right? So, but what does that actually mean? So we are basically what the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency is we work with partners to defend against today's threats, whether it's physical or cyber. We want to build a more resilient infrastructure for our future here in the United States. So we are the operational lead for the federal cybersecurity, and we're also the national coordinator for critical infrastructure. And there's 16 different sectors for critical infrastructure. So if your organization is one of those 16 sectors, you can take advantage of our free services. All of our services that are on our website are documents or whatever are free to everybody to download. So anybody can download those and use those. But we have other services that are available to stakeholders. And we say stakeholders, we're really talking about critical infrastructure partners. But look at what those critical infrastructure sectors are, because like one of them is financial, right? And so a lot of organizations may fit under financial services that may be available to get our services. A good example of that, I know from our physical security side, like houses of worship can get, physical security assessment, right? So we are very broad. We are here to help. If you want to engage with CISA to find out what services are available to you, I recommend you just go to our website, cisa.gov, or you can email us at central@cisa.gov. And they will direct you to your local cybersecurity or protective security advisor. Again, our role, we're not law enforcement, so we're not the FBI, right? We're not regulatory. We are actually here to help. And our role is to be collaborative, to help strengthen and make, America more resilient just in general, from whether it's physical or cyber.
Thank you so much, Donald. So we're also joined by Karina Clever, CEO of Clever Compliance. Can you please introduce yourself as well, Karina?
Thanks, Ashley, and a pleasure to be here, Donald. Thank you for that. It's always hard to work with IT folks, and they don't really know how to engage with CISA, so that's very helpful. So Clever Compliance really works with all industries, completely tool agnostic, sizes of all companies of all sizes. We have a few different service offerings, right? We take your influences that influence your company, regulations and frameworks. We make sure that they're properly appropriated for you, they're rationalized for your services, and that they're reflected properly in your documents, which really are for the purpose of guiding your your people that work there on how to best behave and what your company's expectations are. And of course, inside there are a lot of those controls for least privilege, right? Amongst others. Make sure that those documents and those controls are reflective in your organization, that evidence is gathered at the appropriate timelines, that there are pass and fail criteria so that you have enough to be able to build a risk registry. And create mitigation efforts, if any, to do audit preparedness, and then also, of course, continual improvement over the years and the months to come after standing up a GRC COE. So that's what we do.
Perfect. Thank you. So in our prep, we talked about problems in security, and it starts with enterprises understanding the difference between IT and governance. So Donald, can we start with that? So what is the difference between IT and governance?
And that's one of those interesting questions, right? As auditors, and Karina and I before we were talking about it, we were geeking out on this. So this is kind of like an important thing. And as auditors, we kind of understand that. And I think regular enterprise management doesn't always get it. Governance is what happens to IT. It's not in IT, right? It's usually separate from it. It's how you manage it. How do you manage enterprise risks that happen to be cyber, right? And so if you look at IT and governance, I guess one good way to explain it is if you look at job descriptions for CISOs or Chief Information Security Officers, you'll find that a lot of them are operational. They'll say you're going to monitor, network traffic, and you'll be head of the SOC or, the Security Operations Center. And then you'll see a number of other ones that are really about the governance, risk, and compliance roles, right? And the governance, risk, and compliance roles are going to be very similar to what you might have in internal audit functions. Some organizations may have it that way, but the idea is IT is doing their thing. They're making sure that, systems are available and they're resilient and they're backing things up and they're doing all those operational things. The question is then, how do you verify that they're doing those things internally? And then how do you make sure that the risks are being addressed? And typically you want those two functions to be separate, right? It's really hard to provide any oversight to IT if you report to the head of IT. So a lot of organizations will have the CIO as the head of IT and the CISO underneath that position. That's great for the operational side of things, the Security Operations Center, managing the logs and responding to incidents, threat hunting, and all those types of things. But on the governance, risk, and compliance side, it's really an oversight type of role and really should be outside of the IT infrastructure completely so that they can provide some level of assurance to the stakeholders, such as the board or the CEO, or if it was the city manager and the council. So whoever the governing board is like, how do you make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing? I mean, we have all these controls in finance and they're relatively well understood, but on the IT side, it seems like organizations have a hard time implementing the same level of controls and same level of separation of duties, right? Karina, I know you have some thoughts on that.
I do for sure.
Yeah. So Karina, how does this work in the real world? So what would you say the difference between IT and governance is? And how do you see enterprises differentiate the two for security and compliance? Or are they even differentiating?
So they should be differentiating. So if you imagine a pyramid, really governance is at the top of that pyramid. And all the remainder bottom of that pyramid feeds into that top, and it involves IT as well as other groups, right? That evidence that you're going to be collecting, it can also be from finance, can also be from legal, can also be from HR, can also be from some of the vendors that you're working with, right? So that governance, that top of the pyramid is really about establishing how are you going to be providing oversight for that entire pyramid, and what kind of evidence are you going to want to have at the ready and reviewed how often? Once a week, once a month, once a quarter, whatever works for your company is what you decide in. Make a decision, change it later, right? Go do that policy review the next year and determine what didn't work so you can make the adjustment on the controls. But really, when you establish those controls, they're pervasive all the way down in the company, through the entire company. And as you're gathering that evidence, You want to make sure that it's structured in a way that's measurable so that it reports up into that governance oversight. And it comes from all of the different departments. So IT is just one. IT is just one department, and we need to remember that. It's not, governance does not equal IT. IT is just a piece out of governance.
So before we get into the key topic, which is the principle of least privilege, the CISA creates many documents and advisories on cybersecurity, right, Donald?
Oh, yes, we have a ton of them. Again, some of them are assessments that you can have. So we do assessments. They're not like a full audit, but they are, a question and answer type of assessment. You can get one of your cybersecurity advisor, your local cybersecurity advisor, to get on the phone with you and go over the questions. I do highly recommend that you do that because, if I ask you if you read the questionnaire and it says, do you do backups? You're going to say yes. When I ask, and I'm going to say, but do you do it on all these other systems? And then you'll be like, oh, well, I guess not on that system, right? So having that extra set of eyes and having somebody else just walk you through the questionnaire, and it's free. I mean, why not just take advantage of it? So we do have a lot of questionnaires. Like we have the cyber performance goals that talks about the idea of least privilege and zero trust. We have our ransomware guide, which is just updated in October of 2023. So it's brand new, hot off the presses. You want to check that out. If you have not read that, I highly recommend you read that. Part 2 specifically talks about if you have an incident, how to respond to that incident if it's ransomware, in specific order, right? And that specific order is critical for you. So you want to make sure you check that out. And then we have like our other documents, like our zero trust maturity model, which is very popular right now. NIST has their guidance on it, and then we have a guidance that kind of helps you like conceptualize it. Like, how do we look at the 5 pillars of zero trust, and how do we implement that in a maturity level, right? Because you can implement zero trust at a very manual way, but you can also do it in a very optimized way where there's automation involved, and there's a lot of things are being handled automatically, and you have quality assurance and all that stuff, right? So there's a maturity level way of looking at that, right? So I think, and I'm not even scratching the surface of all the different documents that we have, but if you just go to our website, CISA.gov, and you just type in zero trust, you'll find it. If you type in ransomware, you'll find it. I mean, all of our documents are very easy to find. Just type them in the search bar and you'll find all kinds of other things as well.
So the CISA ransomware guide includes many recommendations that enterprises should take to avoid ransomware attacks, right? And this includes the principle of least privilege. So what is this, and why should someone who is responsible for an enterprise's cybersecurity actually care about this?
Well, and that's so when we make these guides, it's not just CISA doing it, right? We work with other federal stakeholders, whether it's NIST, the FBI. We take in all the information and we say, okay, what is it that is helping organizations be resilient against ransomware? In other words, preventing it. But then also, what things can they do to minimize the impact if they are hit and be able to recover fully? And so when we came up with the ransomware guide, it was really the things that our incident responders and pen testers had been telling us that needed to be in place. And one of those things is the least privilege, right? That's like a huge thing, because if you look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework, you can see that when threat actors come into a network, what's the first thing they try to do? Escalate privileges or take over accounts that have privileges. And then it gives them the keys to the kingdom. So, I mean, I don't want to say it's obvious that this is a big issue, but it still is a big issue. And I think a lot of IT shops struggle with how to do this and how to manage all of that privileged access. So one of the reasons why that's in the guide is because it's vital and it's very important. Part of that's multi-factor authentication. Yes, that goes a long way. It's not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve all your problems, but there's some very basic stuff that we can do. And it's not even just in our ransomware guide. In our cyber performance goals, it's one of the top 34 things that we recommend you do. So if you haven't looked at anything else, look at our cyber performance goals, a great place to start. Make sure you're doing those 34 things. After you've done those, then look at our ransomware guide, make sure you're doing those things to make yourself more resilient to that. But in both of those guides, both of them are going to talk about managing, privileged access. So And all of that comes from known incidents. We know this will reduce risk greatly. That's why we recommend it. We don't make stuff up just to make stuff up, right? It comes from someplace, right?
Karina, did you have something to add to this?
Yeah, so two quick things. Least privilege permissions and elevated permissions that are assigned to job duties specifically that require background checks in most companies are really relevant and present in most regulations and frameworks. I actually can't think of one, spanning from your HIPAAs to 21 CFRs to NIST to, I mean, all of them, your GLBAs, your FFIECs, all of the requirements, all of the frameworks and regulations out there do require heightened focus on the level of permissions that you're assigning the folks that are working in your organizations, and even more scrutinized requirements for granting highly privileged access to any of your systems, even federal space, all of it, right? So I think that's the first thing. The second thing I really want to address is for any publicly traded companies out there, securities exchange requirements for posting within 4 days and reporting on your 8K within 4 days, the fact that you have a breach that's occurred or a cybersecurity incident that's occurred. Please make sure that you have inside your incident management competency area the association of particular roles to handling an incident, and think about drill that workflow that's going to require the 4 business day fulfillment, meaning you have an event, you do your RCA, your root cause analysis, you pull in any of the other teams, your HR, your vendors, your legal group, your finance group, and that there is a full reporting. A lot of departments don't pivot this quickly to have that full continuous workflow be completed in 4 days. So I'm recommending to drill within your own company how to do that reporting. And people are saying that they're not going to be doing reporting because their material weakness is so high. They continue to raise this threshold. Not always available for all companies. So be sure to find out what that threshold is for your company.
Donald, what are some of the methods that an enterprise can use to meet this principle of least privilege?
Well, I think privileged account management is going to be one of the big ones, right? That's going to be one of the top ones that you're going to want to work on. And again, a lot of our guidance will reiterate that across our ransomware, cyber performance goals, and our zero trust maturity model. But when we look at it, you probably want to look at it from a maturity standpoint, right? So you can have some very, like having a password management system, having multi-factor authentication. You may want to do work on your identity stores, like how are identities stored? I don't know how many times as an auditor I would do a scan on the network and then we'd find an Excel sheet that had a list of all the passwords, right? That's not a great thing. And I know I just said that, and there's probably people listening to this right now, they're just cringing, like, oh yeah, we have one of those Excel sheets, right? So those types of things are some of those things that we need to address, some of those very low-hanging fruit type of items. Our guidance now is that we're saying 15 to 16 character passwords is what we're looking for. 8 character passwords, even if they're complex, are easy to crack, right? So if you have an administrative account or something like that, we need to take care of that, right, and get that down. The other thing is, how many times this still happens as, not that I've audited in the last couple of years, but last time I did an audit, it was still a big problem. And that is you have excessive privileges. You still have administrators on the desktop. You still have, I had somebody that was not even in IT that was in the domain admins group. And I'm like, why is this person in the domain admins group? Right. And so when you find those types of things, these are things like, how do you look for that? Like, you have to have a method when you go up the maturity level. You want to have a method that's going to alert you to that type of incident happening, right? Somebody was added to the domain admins group. Why? Right? Who's going to check that? So as you get more and more mature, hopefully you're going to have an alerting system and you're going to have some type of automation that's going to be put around that. Something that's enterprise-wide, not just dealing with just your network operating system. You want something that it covers all the other applications that you have. If you have a big ERP system, a lot of them have this stuff built into it, but may not be turned on. And then who's monitoring it, right? So you have those systems. I know if you work for the government or like a local government, you have a lot of major systems that you have across enterprise level systems that come from a lot of software vendors that are niche, that only deal with local government. So sometimes they don't have all those features, and you have to look elsewhere to get those features of account management and those things. So I think I kind of like give a shotgun answer there because there's a lot to it, but.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. So, Karina, are most companies able to leverage this guidance? And in the real world, are enterprises always meeting these recommendations?
So the unfortunate answer is no, because a lot of the regulations and framework are written ethereal sometimes, right? Vague and nebulous, so that you can take that guidance and implement it into your own company. And that's very important to acknowledge, that you should never take guidance in these documents and verbatim copy them into your environment, because, and I mean, I can't stress that enough, how many times people use templates or whatever else, and they're like, look, it says change management, and here's my change management that says shall, uses the word shall everywhere. I mean, that's kind of silly. That's kind of like me saying I shall be 20 years old and petite and blonde. It just, I mean, sure, it just doesn't apply to your real world. So you have to take this guidance, you have to appropriate it for yourself. That's one of the most important things. But without that, really, without that appropriation, it's very hard for companies to follow this.
And Karina, can you share some examples of how to operationalize these principles of least privilege across the enterprise? Sorry, that was a tongue twister.
That's okay. Start with HR and look. So your HR system has job groupings, their job families, different systems call them different things. There's bundles of titles that when you hire someone and you assign a job description to them and a title, they have a particular designation. There's a department, there's a salary level, there's ways to group the humans in your company. Start there, and then take those roles and align them to, here's a system that this role needs, so that when Paul or Susie or John or whoever joins into a position, they're assigned a specific, unique set of privileges for the roles associated and the systems associated to their role. That's very important to standardize that. What happens then is you actually have exception handling for any elevated privileges. So if you hire a financial analyst that has a specific set of systems associated to that role, and those systems have an appropriate level of permissions, meaning read, write, delete, right? All of these permissions per that role, then anything above that, go get that signature, go get a manager accountable to say, I'm allowing this person who should have had this lower level privilege to have higher level privileges. One of the largest gaps right now and the biggest risks that we have is our contractors do not go through HR systems. So that literally leaves these big open wide holes when they leave, and the hiring manager is so busy that they forget to fill in that termination paperwork because it completely bypasses all of HR's triggers. That contractor, third party, vendor, whatever you want to call them, okay, they're not an employee, they're a worker in the company that's not an employee. They may have access to systems. I mean, honestly, sadly, I've seen folks with access 1.5 to 2 years in after they've left, because people just forget to remove that access. So your new access is through HR. Your additional edited access based on maybe a new role, any changes, HR, combination of HR and manager approval for anything elevated. Your termination needs to include all of your systems, because you may have some of them identified, but not all. Again, another big gaping hole, because people may be able to come in through a back door somewhere and no one would ever know. And that's how we lose a lot of our data these days.
And Garrett, I want to pivot over to you and UAttest. So can you comment on how UAttest can be used to meet the principle of least privilege, as well as meet the guidelines that Donald and Karina have talked about?
Yeah, great setups here. This is important. I can go. UAttest is a tool that, as Katrina and I have been working on, it can go and fits into existing environments. Existing, both the HR and the IAM systems, pulls out the entitlements, and then allows the enterprise, the risk managers, as Donald and Katrina set up, the people in the risk department to govern, to say, hold it, y'all. Let me see what kind of entitlements we have granted, and let's get control of this. And Donald set it up perfectly. He said, first of all, let's start with a static. Let's go to these accounts and look who's in there, right? Why? I love that. I was taking notes. Donald goes, why does this guy have domain access? That's really dangerous, right? That's called a user access review. Everyone in the audience, I'm sure, is probably required. I don't care if you're into healthcare, you're under HIPAA high trust, right? If you're into retail, you're under PCI DSS. If you're publicly traded, you're under SOX. I can keep going, right? There's some regulation that says you should be enforcing the principle of least privilege, right? And then Donald Ladd said, okay, what about the additions? What about the additions? What about we add someone to the domain? Let's say hypothetically someone becomes an Okta admin like the Caesars MGM. Is that a good thing? Probably not, right? Probably not. That's going to cause trouble. That's where UAttest has triggers that says this has occurred in a group. You, the enterprise, you, the risk manager, has said that's a problem. Okay. That's a problem I need to know. And UAttest customers today that Ashley's manages have done that. And then lastly, Donald pointed out, hold it, to get this stuff done, we're going to have to automate it. We got to automate this stuff, right? Just having guys look over spreadsheets, responding to emails. How's that working out in the real world, Karina, right? It's one more email people don't read. It's one more ticket people don't respond to. That's why UAttest has automated the entire user process, the automation process, and now has added AI to help identify the troubled accounts, in which when we determine the accounts that are overprivileged, tongue twister, right, Ashley? Overprivileged and violate the segregations of duties that we set up in our product. So that's it. In the real world, it's taking the problem. Donald set this up. This is what's going on. This is what we got to fix. Karina's saying this is the problems that she's seeing, and UAttest is a tool that plugs right into your environment and addresses these. Take it away, Ashley.
Perfect. So I want to switch topics a little bit here. So let's talk about zero trust. So this is something that IT is trying to get their head around. So Donald, to help enterprises adopt zero trust, the CISA has created the often cited zero trust maturity model document. So can you help explain what this is?
Yeah, it's our guide to help. Originally, and if you read it, you'll see that in there. It's written because we help the federal government implement these types of things. I mean, NIST will come out with a guidance, and we'll come out with a guide that kind of helps you understand that and conceptualize it and action it, right? And so sometimes if you read the guide, you'll see sometimes in there, it'll say agency. You could just change that to organization. So this applies to anybody, but we write, the guide was kind of written in that time. If you read it, sometimes you say, well, this doesn't apply to us. We're not an agency. Well, it does. Just translate that. But the idea is we created this document to kind of help focus everybody's attention on looking at it from a maturity standpoint, and then looking at we have the 5 different pillars and the foundation of zero trust, right? So we give you a conceptual framework that kind of helps you look at, feel, and think, and then kind of make sure that you're covering everything. As an auditor, I go in and we would talk about zero trust, and they're like, well, I have network segmentation. And I'm like, well, that's only part of it, right? Network segmentation, yes, that's important, but that's not the only thing, right? So if you really look at our zero trust model, you'll see the 5 pillars there. One of them is identity, which is what we've been talking a lot about today. But we also talk about devices, network, applications, or workloads, and data, right? Why does everybody have access to the financial shares? That's data. Why do they have access to the data? They don't need to have access to that data. Why is a finance computer able to talk to the camera system? That's a good example of not having zero trust, right? Everything's willy-nilly, everything can connect to everything. This makes it so easy for threat actors to just walk through your network and get into everything, right? So we want to make it as difficult as possible for threat actors that even if they get a foothold inside your organization, that they're not going to be able to go any further, right? And zero trust helps that. And so zero trust is kind of like a really big deal right now. And I think a lot of people just kind of, maybe it seems too complicated, or maybe they make it too simple and just think about network segmentation. No, we got to talk about identity as well, right? We got to talk about devices.
Donald, that is the best of it. I am going to quote that so many times in meetings because I love zero trust, and I built models around it years ago at Silence. Before then, I read the Forrester and said, hold on, I can map this idea to this. And that's where I love CISA, and I love the work you're doing, getting there out there and explaining concepts to people. Because everyone should know vendors are kind of at fault here, y'all. Because we will get okay. Then we all agree.
Yeah, that's actually, I was going to chime in on that and basically say
we're at fault because we'll see an idea and say, "Oh, I'm it." Well, and for whatever reason, the network segmentation people took zero trust and ran with it before anyone else did. And I'm a little baffled at that because I'm much more of an identity guy than a network guy, even though I work at Cisco and all that. I was like, why is everyone just appropriating this to network segmentation? I would literally get in discussions about zero trust, principal of least privilege with people, and they would look me in the eye and go, but I'm doing network segmentation. I'm like, keep up the good work, Donald. The word's got to get out.
I want to actually add one more thing. I think from a governance perspective, we have to remember that all of our data, regardless of the vendors we have in our company, belongs to us. So if we take our data and we send it to a vendor, doesn't matter what the vendor, if there is any data storage, data processing, data transportation, these are NIST standards occurring at a vendor with your data, please understand that you are still accountable for it, right? So really, really important to talk about these same principles. This is becoming my new favorite framework, honestly, to address also all of these controls with your vendors and forcing them to do logical access controls, proving you DRBCP, showing you where your data is going if they're sending it to a third party, asking about their insurances, if any, if their vendors, so their subservice organizations are including this data. And one more thing, please be cautious with those SOC 2s. Lots of awesome auditors out there, and I'm just making sure that everyone's understanding the scope, because many SOC 2s, most SOC 2s exclude subservice organizations. So just because you did a vendor assessment and you got that SOC 2 does not mean that you have transparency into what that vendor is doing with your data downstream, how much of it they're holding, where they're sending it, how long they're retaining it for, and if there are any destruction principles in place. So that's just kind of, I think, an add-on to this permission. Sorry, I increased scope here. Go ahead.
No, you made some good points that I kind of want to dovetail off of too, because part of this is enterprise risk, right? And if you look at our zero trust maturity model and you look at their little graphic that we have the 5 pillars. At the very bottom, it says governance, right? I think a lot of people kind of skip over that. And part of it, if you read in the document, it talks about governance, it talks about enforcing policies and procedures, but it also talks about mitigating security risks, right? So that enterprise risk management function of cybersecurity needs to be a part of this overall thing. And you totally blew it away there, Karina, when you were talking about what about third parties, right? When I was in that role of governance, risk, and compliance when I was at the city of Livermore, and that was one of the things that was the biggest struggle that we had is like, what are the third parties doing, right? IT doesn't have necessarily the skills, or they don't teach them necessarily the skills of like, how do we evaluate what the third parties are doing? And is there any supply chain behind that, right? And how many third parties do you go back, right? You have a cloud service. Yep. And here's a good example. You get an ERP system and I'd say, can I see your SOC 2? And they give me Amazon SOC 2. I'm like, well, that's part of the cloud part of it, but you have an application on top of it that you're responsible for. So where's your SOC 2, right? So that's a really important thing that we have to look at, especially when we're looking at the zero trust model. You know, we used to always say trust but verify. Now we're saying never trust, always verify. But it's one of those things that we have to do. We don't know necessarily where all of our data is, and we need to manage that. We need to manage that risk, right? Because we want to avoid. Well, we're hoping that you're going to be resilient when you can avoid any shutdowns. But a lot of organizations are probably just looking to make sure that they're not in the news, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and let me just go on. I'm not bashing network segmentation. And Donald, you're in the business of helping people understand new ideas. If they come to a new idea via something they understand, which is network segmentation, fantastic. In the first years of the company, we were doing access reviews at blah, blah, blah. Where I hooked up with a old SC friend of mine who went over to a company called Guardicore, which does network segmentation. Great company, picked up by Akamai. And we did a webinar on the principle of least privilege and network segmentation. Because why? Because the users they're letting in through this tool that what they're mapping were 100% just their AD. So in Donald's case, if you got some random guy, right, who has these privileges in the admin groups, guess what? You're allowing that random guy through access through your tool. The tool's just an enforcement point. If you're not practicing the least privilege, there is no security. I mean, just ask our friends and not bashing them. We all, things happen. Target with HVAC, right? It was just some irrelevant, servers. The HVAC set up, some extra people had access to. Okay, they discovered that privilege and went to town on it. That's why zero trust is great, but let's not stop at the enforcement points. What I mean by that, just turning on the mechanism without reviewing who has access is actually causing more problems.
Right,
Let's talk
that's
about.
why you need the oversight, right?
Yes, that's what governance is and all that. And good stuff, Karina. Take it away.
So, yeah, I mean, just even Marriott was leaking for 2.5 years, right? 500 million passports lost. 500 million passports lost.
500 million passports. That's not good.
2.5 years they were leaking, and this is a subservice organization situation, right? So doing that assessment and carefully focusing on vendor management is part of that governance structure. Sorry, I'll get off my vendor
No, that's good.
soapbox.
We all have,
I could go on and on about this one.
Me, and when Donald said, network segmentation with zero trust, I'm like, yes, but come on, y'all, let's go.
Right. Right.
That's what,
And part of that too is, we haven't really touched on this, but the operational technology side of things too, right? That is, you got a lot of legacy systems. And so if you don't know what operational technology is, or OT, it's the ICS systems or the SCADA systems. It's the systems that run plants or water treatment plants or manufacturing floors. Those systems, typically, when you buy those systems, you buy the PLC and you expect it to last 20 years. Well, when you buy a computer, it's not going to last 20 years. If you had a computer from 20 years ago, it can't even run the new operating systems, right? So you're dealing with a lot of older tech or very highly specialized tech that doesn't have the capability sometimes of that zero trust model, right? And so you have to kind of wrap the zero trust around those items. So that's going to be a challenge that we're going to have to deal with as well. And part of that's going to be on the vendor side, right? The vendors are going to have to get the systems to be a little bit more secure. And they are, a lot of the vendors are working on that right now. But it's been a long time. And so we still see, systems being broken into on the OT side of the house. So this is where the IT and OT folks don't always communicate, right? And, not to plug another one of our projects, but our cyber performance goals, one of the big things that it talks about is making sure IT is talking with OT folks, right? Make sure that they're collaborating together on those cyber risks. That's one of the good things if you have the governance, risk, and compliance kind of CISO function outside of IT, they can reach out, like Karina said, to all these other departments and divisions. When I was at the city of Livermore, I spent a lot of time with the water treatment plant. I had to understand their cyber risk. I had to make sure they understood what the cyber risks are, and we had to make sure that we work together to address those, right? So that is a part of it as well. And then, least access and least privilege are going to be a big part of those OT networks as well.
So, Donald, I want to talk about the ZTMM ladder. So, to move up that ladder, automation and tools will be needed to meet these recommendations. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people are only so good, right? If you have somebody that's not looking at alerts, or they're not looking at the analytics, that's not necessarily going to help. I mean, and there's different flavors of automation. You have automation where it can alert you and say, hey, someone's been added to this privileged group, or you can have it where it actually will stop it from being added and then ask, for another person to do a level of approval above that. Making sure the automation doesn't, like, if you're going to have let's say you have a network, or a good example, you're going to have a third party come in to work on a system, that it's automatically going to expire that account and lock them out after the period of time that they are supposed to have, or when they're done working, right? So automation is going to be really critical, because if you have IT admins that have to do it, it's just human nature to take the path of least resistance, right? They turn it on, and then they're supposed to be watching what the person is doing, but then they go off to break, and then they forget about it. And the end of the day comes, and they're worried about the rafting trip they have this weekend going on, right? And so they forget about it. And then that, vendor is now in the system, and then come Monday morning, after they had that great rafting trip, they're not going to remember, right? So automating it is just going to eliminate that human error issue that I think a lot of it comes down to.
So, Garrett, how does UATest map to the ZTMM ladder?
I love, first of all, this is, I'm your standard inventor type, right? I got my 13 patents and identity and all that. And I tend to just dump ideas on people. Okay, that's how I've been my whole life. That's what you meet any inventor. My idea. What I really liked about the CISA Zero Trust Maturity Model V2 is it says, okay, y'all, we got a bunch of stuff to think about, right? We got, the 5 pillars. You got your identity, you got your devices, you got your networks, you got your apps, and you got your data. You got 5 things. But what I really, really liked about it is it went in there and said, okay, y'all, let me quantify this for you, right? And they put it in 4 steps. They put it in the traditional, where we're at today, and they said, why don't we get the first step and get into the initial, and then the advanced, and then the optimal. And that's the way UATest is designed. A lot of them out there are at traditional, and Ashley knows this because she's really our customer success manager and talks to them. And they're starting. They don't have automation. They're still spreading out spreadsheets. They're doing governance ad hoc, right? Take our product. Take UATest. It plugs right into your HR, your IAM systems, and automates. Automate you immediately. Automate you immediately. User access review, so you can start pulling out those bobs that shouldn't be in the admin accounts. Okay. Now you're at initial. Okay, let's get you to advance. In the ZTMM, it says, what we got to do is we got to start feeding information, like you just said, Donald, right? Is IT's got to go into operational. And I didn't say that well. You said it better, right? The system's got to communicate. That's what we're doing. We're saying, okay, if a change happens here, it should trigger. It should trigger trigger someone in security to say this change occurred. And that's what UATest does. It has these triggers built into your IAM system. So it's not just a static review. So it feeds back. This person says, whoa, this change occurred. I don't approve of this change. And then it can stop that change from occurring. In addition, the way I read it, and we all read it in the advance says, hey, we should start having some intelligence in our systems. And Donald, I don't know if I'm wrong, but I read intelligence as AI, okay? And that's what I say. We should automatically come up with scores that say, hey, there's only one of you guys in risk management. You're looking over 1,000 users. Let's get some intelligence. And as Ashley knows, today is a big day for UATest. We just introduced AI scoring, our identity trust score that helps the admins and the risk people identify privileges that are over-privileged, that have a segregation of duty violations, that haven't been reviewed. And there's a real easy-to-read trust score that says this is a problem. And then audience This is the way I read the optimal state. The optimal state is that trust score is refed into the IAM and enforcement points automatically. There is no risk manager. There is no spoon, right? The actual score is fed right into the systems, and it says, hold it. If you're trying to get, these, financial documents, you're trying to get this PHI, you're trying to get this, and your trust score is this, I'm going to treat you differently. And that's where UATest is not just open, but that's our plan, is to work with all these enforcement points, as I call them, to get our identity trust score into the fabric, and that's a Gartner word, into the identity fabric of the rest of your organization. And we're more than ready and willing and have the APIs ready to work with you. So that's the way I see UATest mapping to the 4 stages of the Zero Trust maturity model.
So, Karina, any thoughts about ZTMM and real life application of this model?
So many thoughts. So I'll try to keep it a little shorter. So the baseline of these pillars, the baseline does say governance, right? And so from a governance perspective, what I'm very excited over is evidence gathering, right? So when you've established that governance framework and you can collect the evidence along the way to prove that your controls are being fulfilled, and they can feed into that governance program that says, here's how we will improve our numbers, and here's how we will provide better coverage, and here's how we will increase our scope so that the entirety of the environment and the enterprise is being addressed and being looked at. There's automation, orchestration, and visibility and analytics. Those are basically the foundational pieces of these pillars. And when they continue to feed the evidence and the data that you need to make good decisions on improving your level of maturity, then basically the rest of the pillars can increase their levels of maturity. So now you get this optimized level, and it's called optimal is the best level of these processes that will literally shelter and encompass your entire infrastructure.
Perfect. Okay, so let's take some questions. So do you think that having to handle so much paperwork deters in the due diligence process, or frankly, lack of knowledge, or both? And if so, why?
I'm sorry, can you read that again about the paperwork? I'd like to address that.
I think the question is saying that, hey, again, Karina, God, stop, Garrett, and you would see this, and I think you agree, people associate governance with spreadsheets. They just do. They just associate the project. So take it away, Karina.
So here's what happens. I usually walk into organizations and I literally dump their binders because they have so much unnecessary junk in there. The problem is they use templates and they throw in words that mean nothing to their company, that mean nothing to their organization, that have no auditable, measurable controls, that don't associate risks and responsibility to any of the controls that are in there. They take these nebulously written guidance documents and just do this dump internally into these Word documents, and they sit on a shelf and they don't do anything. A governance program really is supposed to say, here's how we operate, here's who we have to abide by from a regulatory and framework perspective. And remember the difference, right? Regulations is you go to jail if you don't abide. Frameworks is it's a nice to have. You don't have to adopt all of it. Most companies are not mature to adopt all of it. You can set up a roadmap to get to there. And I'm going to use the example of I'm going to use one example, 21 CFR 135, 115. Anyone that wants to, please look it up. I was at a biotech company who has to abide by FDA, right? FDA says, controls everything that goes in our mouth. And this particular section of 21 CFR says, if you make goat milk ice cream, you have to use goat milk. That's what it says. I'm in a pharma company. They don't make goat milk ice cream. They make meds. So what do? Is we're appropriating these controls. We say, this doesn't apply to us. We acknowledge it. Nothing to do with us. You put it away. It doesn't need to be in your binder. Why should it be there to start with? How are you going to make a governing control to gather evidence on goat milk ice cream if you don't make goat milk ice cream? Right? So really, like, just common sense. Look at your documents. You don't have to drown in documents. Your documents are there to, number one, help the people that work for you succeed. Because if they're not given instructions, they shrug, they bring what they had at the old company in with them, and then they're like, well, I guess I'm just gonna wing it. This is what we used to do, and I don't know that this satisfies the controls at this company. So having and then the success criteria to tell people that this is what success looks like and this is how you fulfill your functions. It needs to be lean. These are work instructions, policies, processes. They should not be crosses to bear. They should make your life easier to actually fulfill your job functions.
And I would add to that, I wasn't a big fan of having a lot of paperwork like Karina was talking about, right? Even as an auditor, I'm like, hey, make sure it's the simplest possible thing. Make sure that I, as an auditor, when I read it, I understand what you were going for, right? If you put a lot of vague terms in there, that's just going to open you up to a lot of questions. So if you don't like your auditors asking a lot of questions, be very specific, right? And very detailed, very short, concise, to the point. The other thing I think part of that is making sure that we look at this from an enterprise risk point of view. And this is not an IT problem. This is a business problem, right? And so we have to kind of like change our mindset there. And that's where the governance part of it comes in. And then when you look at it from that point of view, you understand the enterprise has all kinds of risks, right? And at the end of the day, the CEO or the board, they're really going to be concerned about your ability to make widgets, right, at the end of the day. So you have to align those things. And so one of the things that I did when I was the head of cybersecurity is I actually set it up. So we used a GRC application, and then we put in tasks that would go through there. So anytime a new product that was in IT was going to be purchased for the organization, it went through the automated process where I had to review it. I had to look at it. I had to understand what it was. I had to look at the contract, and then I would have to note my items on the contract that I had a concern or raised our risk, to then pass it off to the legal department for them to review and them to sign off on it. You don't have to create a lot of paperwork, right? And I would avoid spreadsheets and Word documents and put it into a database where it's better and it can be associated with one another, right? Because you should have your mission, your objectives, and everything should align to those. And you can do that if you have those type of GRC applications, right? And then it should be an ongoing, constant process. One thing that always drove me nuts, and part of it is the standards say at least once a year you have to do a risk assessment. You should be doing it all year round, right? Anytime a new thing comes into your system or the system changes or anything like that, you should do an assessment. And then document that assessment, put it in the database, add it to your risk registry. So we know we have this risk. This is how we're addressing it. Then implement any other documentation that needs to be updated. But it doesn't have to be a big, huge problem. The problem is that you have people that can do that. The GRC folks, that's kind of their job, is to document that thing. So auditor come and look at it. So it's not really, I think the question is probably coming from some of these in IT, right? And they're like, why am I documenting this?
So can I add two quick things to that?
Please.
Thing number one is when auditors walk in the door, auditors know what the regulations and frameworks say. It's public knowledge. Go on NIST.gov and pull NIST down. They don't need to audit what's already publicly available. Why would you waste your time with that? They want to see how you've taken that guidance and appropriated it for your own company. Point number one. Point number two is a risk is defined as, sure, yes, there are frameworks, there are guidelines, absolutely. You want to follow ISO 31000, you want to follow NIST 830, I mean, whatever you want to do, awesome. At the core, what lands on your risk register is that control that's documented, meaning this is what we want to do, or this is how we want this to turn out. And the fact, if it doesn't happen, what is our risk? Do we care a lot? Do we not care? Right? So if you have a control that fails, you need to have a conjoined risk to it that says this failed control, I'm going to run around the hallways with my head on fire. Somebody pay attention to me. Or this control, it failed, but you know what? Really not that important. We'll look at it next week. right? So every single control that you have in your governing documents needs to have an associated risk. That's how it works.
Yeah, I dovetail on what Karina said. That's absolutely 100% right. And you need a database to do that because you're going to have a many-to-many relationship in that database, right? You may have one control that addresses a number of different risks, and then you may have one risk that has a number of controls applied to it. So you're going to have a many-to-many relationship. It's not a one-to-many or one-to-one relationship. So you need to know, and you need to be able to quickly see this control failed. What's my risk? You need to be able to answer that question right away. And you can only do that really in a database. It doesn't work in Excel. It doesn't really work in Word. So I'm not trying to sell you anything, but it's just there's tools out there that can help you do that.
Sure. Yeah.
So, Garrett, what key performance indicators and metrics do you recommend for effectively measuring and monitoring the progress and effectiveness of zero trust implementation with an emphasis on least privilege access control?
What a setup for the next webinar, or the next webinars we'll have. Literally released this weekend is in the product is the ability of UAttest to show straight out the trust that you should have in the permissions and entitlements in your users and admins, etc., in your world. This is straight out in our dashboard that allows us to allows the risk manager to look instantaneously and say, I have to address these permission and entitlement problems based on relevant information we took from the industry. One, group anomalies. Some things about hackers. Hackers don't respect two things. They do privilege escalation and they don't respect segregation of duties, okay? Pretty sure, okay? So we take in both of those factors and then we do something that no one else has. We actually factor in the last time someone's done an access review of this user or this entitlement. And that gives us a score that allows you to say, I've got to look at these users. I wanted to leave time straight out for both Karina and Donald to give them time for people to set up appointments directly with them. So take it away, Ashley.
Sure. So, Donald, can you tell the audience how to reach and follow your work at the CISA?
Yeah, if you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, you can reach out to me. I think if you're on LinkedIn, you could probably, I'm tagged on that, so you can find me there. But all other places, any place that you are, if you just go to send an email to central@cisa.gov, they will connect you to whoever the local cybersecurity advisor is for your area, or physical security advisor, if the case may be. And then we're here to help. So just reach out and say, hey, I'm interested in finding about CISA services, and just send an email and someone will get back to you.
Perfect. And Karina, can you please let the audience how they can get a hold of you?
Absolutely. So I am Karina, Karina at clevercompliance.com. I'm on LinkedIn, and I am available. We are offering a few discounts for discovery sessions, kind of on the house, to see if we could help people up through the end of February. And so you can go ahead and contact me for that. Really interested in this entire community getting super good at what they're doing and securing all of our data, because we want to make sure, because I'm also a consumer privacy fan and follower, and want to make sure that everyone's data is safe, and you enact your privacy rights if you have access to them. And definitely we also build consumer privacy workflow for the 5 states that have consumer privacy laws right now. So go ahead and just reach out on LinkedIn.
Sounds good. And then we at UAttest can be reached at uattest.com, or of course, write us at info@uattest.com. Thank you so much, Donald. Thank you, Karina, for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you,
Amazing.
everyone.
Yes, thank you very much, Donald. Thank you very much.
Amazing event. Thank you.
That went quick. All the best. Good stuff. And great job, Ashley.
Thank you. Bye.
Well, just write us with more questions. We'll do one-on-one meetings and get Donald or Karina on the line as well. Okay? All the best.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Bye.